Let's walk through some of what it is that we're talking about doing. Initial questions: direct oil spill, current and post remediation. And of course, I look around the room, I see a lot of faces of folks that we worked with in the past. You know that I prefer to use the word remediate as opposed to clean up. Clean up implies that we're going to get this system, this ecosystem, back the way it used to be. I'm not an environmental scientist, I'm not a physical scientist, I'm a poor old country appraiser. But having said that, we know that cleanup is probably not the operative word here. That remediate is the operative word. So what happens to the value of properties, businesses, taxing authorities, the ecosystem post-remediation? Indirect losses, businesses, resorts, etc. Short and long-term effects, and of course stigma. As you know, our firm introduced the term stigma in the appraisal lexicon some 20 years ago following the work we did in the Exxon Valdez oil spill. How do we measure stigma, and how are we going to be able to wrap our heads around that? What about proximate properties? Up to this point, we've been talking about waterfront properties and properties immediately appurtenant to the waterfront. But what happens when we can get a little bit of distance away? One quick back-of-the-napkin estimate comes from my good friend Norm Miller. Norm is professor of real estate finance at University of San Diego. He's currently on loan to CoStar. Norm made an estimate just for Florida. And by the way, I will go ahead and tell you that Norm himself thinks these numbers are extraordinarily low. But he made an assumption of 1 acre deep, and a square acre would give you a coastal edge of 208 feet and a depth of 208 feet. 569 miles of potentially affected Florida coast gives us 14,000 and some change acres. Waterfront land in 2009, and this is after the impact of the recession, was selling for $2 to $8 million an acre. Let's go on the low side and say $3 million. Applying a 10% diminution in value, and again, everybody admits this is de minimis, we get $4.32 billion just in the loss of the front 200 feet of Florida waterfront. Intriguingly enough, this kind of matches up to the loss in St. Joe paper stock. So if you were to take the number of acres they've got on the water, crunch through the loss in market value of their stock, you kind of start triangulating on that number. Let's look at the other 3 states. Home in the immediate path of the oil leak are forecasted to decline at least 30%. That estimate's coming out of New Wire Investor using the housingpredictor.com numbers. What do I tell the owner of $1 million house is the value if he can no longer walk on the beach? Now this is the second sentence of this is probably more interesting than the first. If you think about the waterfront properties, and if you get down the coast of Florida, in any of these taxing authorities, any of these counties, the vast majority of the value is contained in the first couple hundred yards of the beach. You start from the high water mark, go back a couple hundred yards, that's where all your tax assessed value is. You diminish the value of those, but you still want to keep the schools open, you still want to keep the cops employed, you still want to keep the firemen running their trucks. So what do? You got to crunch up the taxes on the other side of the county. So in fact, the economic impact of this reverberates all the way to the county edge.